The opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Cable 14, its sponsors, or its shareholders, Cogeco Cable, Shaw Cable, and Source Cable Limited.
And welcome to the September 13th edition of Hamilton Talks. I am Larry Di Ianni, the host of the program, and this is our very first program of the brand new season. And you'll remember that Hamilton Talks is a community affairs program where we talk to Hamiltonians who are prominent and are making things happen, and sometimes not as well known, but also moving our community forward. And I'm very pleased to have as our very first guest of the season this evening, Mr. Paul Johnson. Paul Johnson joined the City of Hamilton in November of 2010 to take on the role of Director of Neighbourhood Development Strategies. This new position works out of the City Manager's office and is responsible for developing strategies for aligning investments and activities to better support healthy neighbourhoods. Prior to joining the City, Paul worked in the private sector and also for the non-profit sector as Executive Director of Wesley Urban Ministries, an organization providing services for those trapped in cycles of poverty. He's an avid basketball fan. Paul was the play-by-play voice of McMaster University basketball in the 90s and continues to referee the game at a local and provincial level. And I welcome you to the show, Paul.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks, Larry.
Well, Paul, you are the Executive Director, or at least the Director of Neighbourhood Development.
Yes.
Dealing mostly with neighborhoods that are trapped in cycles of poverty. So not terribly different in terms of the work you were doing for a specific segment before. Right now you're doing it for the whole city.
Yeah, it's been a nice change to move into the bigger realm, but also deal with all the issues that make up healthy neighborhoods. So to take it away from looking at only aspects to deal with income, but look at how we build neighborhoods across the city of Hamilton that are great places to live, work, play, and learn. So that holistic view of it is what I really like. Yes, you're helping people, and certainly we're starting our work in neighborhoods that have some specific challenges, but more of this work as we roll it out over the coming years and decades ahead will be about every neighborhood in Hamilton being a great place.
Well, and we're going to get into some of that, the work you're doing, the groundwork you've done already. But first, let's talk about Paul Johnson. I know that you're a native Hamiltonian. Tell us a little bit about yourself other than your passion for basketball.
Yeah, for Hamilton for almost all my life. There was a short period. My wife is English. We moved to England for a few years where I worked in the private sector in England, but my life has been in Hamilton. Born here, raised here, educated here. McMaster grad, graduate of Sir Allan McNabb High School, live in the West Mountain, and grew up in the West Mountain. So I have this great opportunity, and it fits in with my work that I now live in the neighborhood in which I grew up, and I understand just how important that is to be in that place. It's familiar, good positive environment. So Hamilton's my home. I love this city. It was strange to be away from it for a few years. Great to come back to it as I did in 2000 and now working for the city of Hamilton.
And of course, when I first met you, you were doing some great work for Wesley Urban Ministries. And I don't think it's unfair to say that you were dealing with perhaps some of the more challenged individuals in the community. People who were not only facing cycles of poverty, but addictions in many cases, people that often are considered to, unfortunately, to be throwaways. And you were trying, and your organization was trying to deal with that, build them up, and create as comfortable an existence for them as possible. How did that work inform what you're doing now?
Well, what I really learned there is that people are people. And yes, I was dealing with a lot of the folks that most Hamiltonians don't get a chance to meet on a day-to-day basis, or if they do, it's sometimes not in the most positive environments. And we hear about that. We hear about that in our downtown core. We hear about that in some of the neighborhoods. Homelessness, addictions, some of those issues. What I got to see is the other side, about people really wanting to take their life to the next level, people wanting to be successful. And by successful, I don't necessarily mean millionaires and Wall Street muckety-mucks, but folks that wanted to contribute to the community and be a part of this community. And the joy I had was finding the ways to make that happen. You know, it was things like going to the Homeless Baseball League and watching folks participate in an athletic venture and really focusing on how that was part of the recovery process that they were going through. I really loved the days where we were seeing fewer people coming to our emergency shelter, not because we were sending them to some other community, but because we were housing them and watching life transform when you go from living on the street or in a shelter to having your own home and feeling part of community. So I've taken a lot of that and said, you know what we need to do is make sure that our neighborhoods are supportive places for everyone, because people want to live in a, whether you are dealing with homelessness and coming out of a shelter system, whether you are the CEO of a corporation in this community, you want a neighborhood that's safe. You want a neighborhood that supports your development and your family's development. You want a neighborhood where you go home and say, hey, this is a great place to be. So I learned a lot about that from one part of the population at Wesley. Now the fun I have is I get to see that for a whole bunch of different folks across Hamilton.
We will get into the statistics around poverty for the city. But I know that City Council has been very supportive, obviously. They hired you and they created this opportunity to work with neighborhoods and work with people who are facing challenges. But I also know that there are members of council, the mayor, and I've been there and I know what that's about, who challenged the Social Planning and Research Council when they made a presentation at council with their poverty statistics, saying, you know, things aren't as bad in this community as you guys are saying. How bad are things in this community?
Well, there's challenges in every community, and Hamilton has that. It's interesting, you know, I work in some neighborhoods where they have stricken poverty from their lexicon in the neighborhood. And these are neighborhoods where the poverty statistics would be much higher than the average across the city. I work in neighborhoods that are tired of being labeled as Code Red neighborhoods. As important as the Code Red series was in elevating our consciousness about the differences in outcomes for people.
To some extent, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. And they don't want their neighborhoods to be known as Code Red neighborhoods or poverty neighborhoods. But there is some information and some data that we need to pay attention to. There are communities in this city, neighborhoods in this city, where you'll be hard-pressed to find large numbers of folks with the kind of education that's required in our workforce today. You go to other neighborhoods and everybody has achieved that level and is very competitive in terms of jobs. Some neighborhoods where there's very low income levels because of the type of work that's available, and other neighborhoods where the standard of living is much higher. And that translates into health, health outcomes, it translates into all sorts of things that we would want all our residents to have. And in certain parts of our community, issues are more concentrated. And some of that's been the way Hamilton has developed. And it's not uncommon in cities to see that. And so that's what some of the work of neighborhood development is to try and break down some of that concentration.
All right. And one of the issues, of course, related to this is how the rest of Hamilton, which is a very wealthy community, as we know, with pockets of deep poverty, but a very wealthy community, how it sees poverty in its own midst. And I want you to see a YouTube video that I found made by a Hamilton student. I can't even give him credit because it was not identified on YouTube. I hope he doesn't mind that we're showing it. He's posted it on YouTube, so I'm sure that he wants it shown. But I want you to look at this. It's just a couple of minutes, and it's really a rant on poverty in the city of Hamilton. Watch.
Poverty in Hamilton is a serious problem. Hamilton has the highest rate of poverty in Ontario. 1 of 5 residents in Hamilton lives in low-income households. Poverty rates are even higher among specific groups. Children under the age of 12 are 25%. Seniors over the age of 75, 29%. And recent immigrants, 52%. Municipal and federal governments need to bring prosperity to Hamilton and overcome the roots of poverty. According to Statistics Canada, almost 20%, or 95,370 Hamiltonians, are living on incomes below the poverty line. This is enough to fill Cops Coliseum 5 times. Poverty means having to make the tough decision between paying the rent and buying food. Poverty puts people at greater risk, causes health problems, disabilities, and even death. A recent study conducted by the Code Red series stated that there is a 21-year difference in average life expectancy between Hamilton's best and worst neighborhoods. The average life expectancy in Hamilton's worst neighborhoods is somewhere around the mid-60s. This is the same as some third world countries. Hamiltonians should be appalled by these statistics. We need to become aware of these issues so we can rise against them and conquer poverty once and for all.
Well, now that looked like West Hill High School. I'm not 100% sure, and one of those names is the student, I'm sure. But it's a pretty creative way of getting information across, especially to young people, about the state of affairs around poverty in the city of Hamilton. How accurate was that?
Fairly accurate. The rate has dropped in the last information around 18%, so a little under 1 in 5, a trend that we're happier to see. But I always say that any level of poverty is pretty unacceptable, because poverty at the levels we're talking about in the statistics that were quoted there is not about, not having the chance to go on 2 family trips a year. We're talking about a poverty where, as the student says, you are making choices. Feed yourself and your family, cover off the bills and the living expenses, moving from place to place because affordability runs out. So there is a real need for us to understand that income inequality is having a serious impact, not only on a person's well-being and mental state, but it actually has an impact on health. Some of the most interesting reading I'm doing right now is the impact of chronic daily stress on an individual. And it's not stress as in it was just a bad day. It's the chronic stress of not being able to take care of yourself and your family, being in 2 or 3 jobs and not having control over your own destiny, living in neighborhoods where there are crime numbers that are too high, or a sense of a lack of safety. All of that adds up over years, and it has a serious impact on health. So it's accurate. I think what's interesting is that a lot of the work of the Poverty Roundtable, for instance, in Hamilton, that got going in the middle part of the last decade, has really helped to elevate people's understanding that there are things we need to tackle. I think where we're at now, though, Larry, is, with all respect to those statistics, we can't be defined by the statistics. We have to be defined by the call to action. And we have to start to do some things. And as much as we can say, well, maybe it's the government should come in and solve it, we all know that won't happen, and it isn't possible. It's all of us together on this. And now I think it's about taking some of those statistics, saying it's time to have some proactive approaches. That's where I gain the energy from these days. So it's not that I try and discount those statistics. They are real. And I can introduce you to all sorts of people who feel that struggle personally, who live in the neighborhoods where they watch their neighbors die too young, who see kids dropping out of school too early. I can introduce you to those Hamiltonians, and you can listen to their stories and hear their trials and tribulations. I think what we're trying to do now is galvanize everybody, including those individuals, to say, enough is enough. It's time to move forward, and it's why in the neighborhood approach, this is about having residents at the center of the change, not the academic talking heads, not the inspirational leaders. They're important, yes, but where the change is really going to come from is from large numbers of people deciding, like that student, we got to talk about this, one, and then we've got to do something about it too.
All right, so let's get into the meat of what you're doing. You were appointed 2 years ago almost, this November, yep. I understand. And you were given a couple of $1 million by City Council to do your work, which I applaud, because hiring you and not giving you resources would for sure lead to failure. So what have you been doing the last 2 years?
Well, the first piece of work was to look at other jurisdictions and say, what are the conditions for success if you're going to do neighborhood redevelopment, neighborhood development well? Because, a lot of people say, well, hey, if we just dump a bunch of investment, we try and move some new people into different areas of the city, maybe that's the change that we need to see. Well, actually, in some jurisdictions, that's led to other problems. People have been pushed out of their neighborhoods. People have lived in neighborhoods for years and years. suddenly unable to stay in that neighborhood. That's not progress, that's just pushing issues to other areas. And we wanted to look at what really did work, so the kinds of engagement techniques we could use, and what we found were there were a few key things that we needed to have happen. One is that residents had to be at the heart of this and key stakeholders, so those businesses that are local in neighborhoods, the residents who live there, those most affected by the decisions had to be at the core of decision making. That there had to be investment. You can't wish these things away. Shuffling the deck doesn't work. You actually have to make some tangible investments. And that we had to look at the picture holistically. That if you go in and say, well, the real challenge here is this issue alone, and you ignore everything else that's going on, not much happens. Cleaning up a bit of graffiti on the wall doesn't change some of the other dynamics about attachment to the workforce, about how we support kids to be successful in school. So we needed to look at a whole range of things, not just specific issues. And so we looked at those and took forward to council in June of 2011 a strategy about how we would get going. The other piece that was a great piece of advice as I talked to councillors was, Paul, let's start in a small way in some neighborhoods, not all neighborhoods, but some neighborhoods, and let's learn and develop and then scale it up as we go. And I think that advice was not about being small and not thinking about the big prize, but it was practical. How do we get this stuff going and working well in a small way and then build on that success? And so last summer, we engaged with 6 neighborhoods to begin with. We've expanded that a little bit, but 6 neighborhoods are at the core of our neighborhood work. And they're scattered a little bit around the community. In the far east end, the McQueston neighborhood, butting up against the Red Hill Valley. In the center of our city, we're looking at the neighborhood around the new stadium. For obvious reasons, there's going to be investment there. It's a good opportunity. In our north end, the Keith neighborhood, right downtown, the Stinson and Beasley neighborhoods. And then on our West Mountain, the Ralston neighborhood, around Westmount High School for Hamiltonians who know their high schools. And those were the areas where we were going to try out a few techniques and really start to say to residents, it's time for us to invest, it's time for us to plan together, and it's time for us to talk about what it will take to move these good neighborhoods to an even better place.
You have 4 main goals, at least articulated in one of the reports that went to council. Yep. And I wonder if you can talk about them. I think you've already started, but I wonder if you can explain what it is that you mean by them. And we have a slide, actually, that reminds us of what these are. And this is the first one, Paul. Enhancing community development work.
Yeah. One of the things we saw in other jurisdictions was that human resources assigned to neighborhoods was a good thing. Got people engaged, helped people connect to services and supports in their neighborhood, and allowed us to have presence in the neighborhood on an ongoing basis. Community development is not new in Hamilton, but it was a bit disparate. Few people doing it and not well connected. We now have a team of 5 community development workers. One of the great things about this is, as I always say, you can take the guy out of the nonprofit, but you can't take the nonprofit out of the guy. So I'm a partner freak, and I like to bring other resources to the table. The Hamilton Community Foundation and our Hamilton Best Start Network combined resources so that we could fund 5 community development workers. They're working in 10 neighborhoods at the moment. They'll be expanding to 11 neighborhoods early in 2013. And they're there day to day to work with residents, listen to those concerns, and be able to feed those back. They're also integral in the planning process and helping residents to not only engage in planning, but do the important piece of actually implementing those plans. So they are doing some amazing work. They have helped us in the last year engage neighborhoods in a planning effort. We don't want 25 or 30 people chiming in on what neighborhood plans need to look like. We want hundreds of people, if not thousands, chiming in. And they're really the ones that can help us do that. They're knocking on doors, they're talking at street corners, they're in schools, they are connecting with people. And I'm so glad we've been able to build that team. The second piece was, in leading on from that, is we needed to build these neighborhood plans. And people say, there have been neighborhood plans before. And the answer is, yeah, we've had some of that work going on. It hasn't been as structured, it hasn't been as strongly facilitated, and it hasn't been as resident-led as our recent experience. We've been talking about groups of residents coming together for between 8 and 12 months, depending on the neighborhood, talking about the assets in their neighborhood first. What is it that makes our neighborhood a great place to be? Talking about the challenges, and then starting to get to the solutions. And what we've been very clear with is a long list of everything we'd like to change is wonderful, but not particularly helpful. we have to prioritize. And I have been absolutely thrilled with the effort residents have put in to say, you know what, if we look at things in about a 5-year chunk, where we'd like to be in 5 years, we have to put some things off. We have to make decisions. And I think too often we feel that residents, will just want to put a whole list of things together and never prioritize. Our experience is exactly the opposite, that they want to see things happen. So if it means we say this is more important now than something over here, we're starting to see some of those things go. So we've had them prioritize in terms of short, sort of immediate to 1 year term, medium 2 to 3 years, and long term 4 to 5 years. These plans, the first series of them, 4 of them, are coming to City Council for their consideration in a special meeting of the General Issues Committee in the evening, for the simple reason as the residents will be presenting these plans to their elected officials. And it's going to be a special night because about a year's worth of work is going to be on display, not of paid accountable staff alone, but of residents with the support and help of paid accountable staff.
It sounds like a great process. And I said you had 4 plans. You've talked about at least 2 of them. Show the second one that Paul's covered, increasing investment in neighborhoods, and that was one of them. And the third one was, and we'll show this one, that is the third, increasing investment in neighborhoods.
So let me talk a little bit about that. And people always say, so what have you done yet? And I've said, well, we've been very intentionally held back. Until you have strong plans in place, throwing money at things is not always the answer until we have a roadmap. We're now getting that roadmap, so some serious investment will start to happen in the months and years ahead. But along the way, we looked for early investment opportunities to demonstrate how neighborhoods could start some different things to occur. So in the Stinson neighborhood, for instance, no local summer camp for kids in the community out of their recreation center. We heard that it might be an idea that they were interested in sometime in April. And that was a little late to start planning for a summer camp, but we said, you know what, I think we can do it. How did we do it? We called on a great community partner, the Boys and Girls Club. We asked our recreation staff, can we make this happen in our city facilities? And they were amazing to make it happen. The ward councillor was a real champion of it, Councillor Farr, and the residents themselves went out and publicized it so that people would attend. An absolutely phenomenal camp. Sold out, so to speak, and kids every week having that opportunity. Local kids in their local neighborhood having a camp. And so for the neighborhood, they started to feel, hey, there's some things happening. We've done a couple of park makeover projects. So these gathering spaces in community invested some resources to make their park and their community space a better place for families to be. We've run some events. Small events, but these small investments are about where people can start to bump into each other, learn about each other, and build a bit of that foundation. So that's the early stage of it. The next stage is what are some of those projects and how can we bring investments into the community? And it's not just the city's money. And I've been very clear about this, that the city will have a role to play, as we should, in many of these issues. But some of the things that residents are talking about, aren't in the municipal sphere. They may have to do with education or healthcare or other activities, or may not be things that we have the resources ourselves to invest in. There may just not be enough money or time or talent. So we need some of our partners to come to the table as well. And people are getting creative about this. And through this year of building these plans and talking about early wins and early investments, I've been encouraging people to think about how they can build some of these partnerships with us and make some things happen. I'm going to share a story from an internal story to the City of Hamilton and then some external stories as well.
We've only got about a minute and a half. But
so let me talk about this. Our IT department, not the group you might think would be engaged in the neighborhood initially, came to me and said, we got an idea. We're hosting a conference and we're going to approach some of the sponsors of that conference and have them provide us some resources that we'd like to invest in the neighborhood. Well, it was $15,000. Helped us to purchase some bikes so that people could physically connect with their neighborhood with helmets and locks, but also to purchase some computers so that they could digitally connect and help their kids have access to the right kinds of resources. So those creative ideas are how people are investing. Take it to a big scale. Our Hamilton Health Sciences, the Children's Hospital, is going to be relocating a new children's treatment center in the lower city, providing a better access of equity of access to that program in our lower city. About a 50 million plus contribution. I think it might be more like 80 million at the end of the day, but a major investment in our lower city for services that make sense for people who have trouble traveling to where it is now. They'll have better access to it. This is the way we're working with people to bring investments to these priority areas.
Well, Paul, listen, you've covered off very nicely the 4 goals that you have. You mentioned the community workers as well, which I think will certainly be the eyes and ears of those neighborhoods. You've targeted 6 neighborhoods. There are 11 that you've identified, so this work will spread and grow over the years. How will you work with partners such as HARP, the group that I belong to, or some of the food areas, food agencies, and so on? How do you plan to weave them in to the work that you're doing very quickly?
Well, in 2 weeks when the plans are launched, we're going to be talking to folks and saying, we need everybody to be part of this. This is the blueprint. This is the roadmap for where we want to go. Now, what is it that you can bring to help us along? So rather than having 100 different ideas, some of which we don't know how it connects to where we're moving, we want people to be very targeted in their support of what the residents are saying are priorities for them. So we'll be asking nonprofit organizations, we'll be asking our biggest institutions, we'll be asking business partners to say, how is it that you can help? Sometimes
how will you measure
money.
Success? Very quickly, because we've got to sign off.
Success is measured initially by people feeling much stronger about their neighborhood, being connected, being engaged in their neighborhood. Long term, better health outcomes, better educational outcomes, and ultimately leveling out the playing field of these neighborhoods so that we don't see the kind of disparities that we saw in the Code Red series across the community, that we actually have a better balance of where people are living, healthier places in Hamilton.
Well, Paul, thank you for sharing all of that on our program this evening. You are doing very important work. Thanks for being on Hamilton Talks. And thank you for watching. This was a conversation with Paul Johnson, Director of Neighborhood Developments for the City of Hamilton. And next week, we're going to be talking to Katie McClelland, a yoga instructor who descended into a life of drugs. You don't want to miss that program.